Yeah, that's what we wanted.
Okay, so are we live?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, God. All right. Hi, listeners. This is how podcasts get made. It's very exciting. Sometimes it's hard. And we're doing a new thing today, which is Anton and I are in the same room for a live stream. That's why you'll see us look at each other like this instead of our usual way of just through the screen. We are delighted to be joined today by Merritt, the Lacework Field CISO. We are so happy you joined us. We've been working on putting this episode together for some time. I want to just kick things off. So, first question, very high level. What do you think is the best way that organizations can ensure that as they move to cloud, their security posture doesn't get worse and hopefully improves?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. Hi, folks. Thanks for tuning in. I am Merritt, as mentioned. I'm a field CISO at Lacework and also advise young companies. I am in Miami today, so coming to you from Tequesta, Miccosukee, and Creekland, among others. You know, if it were up to me, I would want folks to move to the cloud for security, but often, obviously, it is the business driving that decision, which makes sense. You know, folks are moving because they want to be able to do compressed R&D cycles, or because they want to be able to tolerate, higher volume requests, or they want to be able to do, whatever their core business is. So I think, security then becomes part of the, okay, we're, the business saying we're going to do this migration, get on board. So I do think that it's a conversation. I came from 5.5 years at AWS in the office of the CISO there, which is like their deputy CISO team. And folks are, trying to wrap their heads around security as they do what is really a business transformation. And I think that ideally, so the short answer is I absolutely think that moving to cloud gives you security benefits. And some of those are sort of inherited, like the investments that Google and other folks make in their hardware takes a whole, and other things like that, takes a whole category of stuff that you don't have to worry about. I mean, literally the premise of cloud is that you're not maintaining those racks, you're not doing the HVAC, and you
don't have to do physical security on your data center anymore. There's a lot of upside. A
laborious investment for the cloud providers that they are taking off your plate from logistical, but also a security standpoint. But also, and similarly, you're able now to do abstracted computing, right? So like, instead of having I've seen folks where their asset inventory is like a list on a person's desk. Yep. And now, I mean, like, you can have that list if you want, but you can also like put out API. You can do an EC2 describe call, and now you know which EC2 instances you have. Like you can validate, you can build using, the benefits of these abstractions, but you also can validate, can enforce actions. Like if you believe in math, it's a really beautiful way to be able to do security, especially for, folks who, 10 years ago, it might have been someone's job to go around and check whether VMs were plugged in. So it's a lot of change in what you have to focus on. And I think that's a real benefit.
So I agree with all of that, but there's a ton of people out there who think that moving to cloud is super risky. And so how do we incorporate that perspective?
Point at
where are
the
they coming
calendar
from?
And say that 2012 is over?
No. We have to meet them where they are.
Okay,
why are they still thinking that, and how do we help them with it?
I think that, well, first of all, most folks are moving or are in cloud. So you're just going to see more security headlines that somehow involve cloud because that's where the action is. But also, in cloud, it doesn't mean that you don't have to do anything. Obviously, your cloud provider doesn't do everything for you. There's sort of levels of managedness in the level of the management of the service. And there's always some piece of it that's on your side as the user. And I think the biggest issue here is just credential compromise. So no matter how good your cloud provider is at building hardware, no matter how good your identity provider is at making sure that you can't just make up a key to get in, like they're using just regular keys that you the end user, I mean, not to blame victims here, but that you, the end user, are not protecting in meaningful ways. And so
now occasionally it is the case that they use the wrong kind of key very sneakily. But we'll leave that aside.
There's all sorts of flavors of security, threats. And of course we see that. And you can also just bring down an enterprise by doing a, denial of service attack or something. Like there's different flavors of security compromises. But generally speaking, the ones that you see most prominently in cloud infrastructure that I think folks are scared of, or like that they get the sense that they should be scared about security, is in credential management. Yep. And it's because folks are just using the front door. These aren't 0 days.
Totally.
They're using legitimate credentials, which is why it's important to be able, and I guess this also speaks to part of that cloudiness of your approach, where it feels uncomfortable if you're not used to having this much data. Like you might have hundreds of thousands of calls that you're now, they're logged, but how do you know what's anomalous? And of course, like refining permissions down is like an ongoing journey. We talk about least privilege as if it's like some end state, when actually you need stuff to work. Stuff has to go through,
But I mean, credentials, of course, come up pretty much in every conversation. So it's not exactly surprising, but of course, a very, very accurate thing. But are there some things that surprised you in terms of the migration challenges? Like to me, credentials wouldn't be a surprising security challenge, just the most popular one. But what are some of the migration security surprises that you've seen? I'm curious.
It's a good question.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I think that a lot of it revolves around a willingness to like lean into cloudiness. So when folks, basically the some folks just lift and shift, and that is fine. That is an approach that
it's fine or fine for now. Is it fine or is it fine for now?
So it is a although it is not the one I condone, it is a reasonable approach that some folks take that says, let me just get my stuff over into this new environment and then I'll re-architect and make it look more cloud native.
Do they ever do that?
It depends. It depends. They should, because from like just a cost and usage standpoint, they should. But also just because cloud environments aren't exactly the same. They don't track exactly even between clouds, let alone, from on-prem to cloud.
Can we pick on that for a second? What are some of the ways that you see that playing out in a bad way for people? What are some of the like cross-cloud gotchas that trip people up?
I think, to be honest, the more small and medium enterprises that have a lot of multi-environment are just doing themselves a disservice, because it's going to be hard to manage. I mean, just the fact of being in a
the three environments existing at all is the gotcha.
Yeah,
yeah, okay.
One of them. Yeah. Because essentially they're going to end up playing to the lowest common denominator. They're going to have, a harder time templatizing when they want to do infrastructure as code. They're going to have to refactor it every time. Remember that even folks like Terraform that, can be used in different environments, Terraform being an infrastructure as code tool for folks from HashiCorp. But like you still have to refactor it because the clouds don't have the same services. They don't have this, you have to. And so as a result, like your visibility now is all over the place. Your ability to put actions on, it's hard enough to do in one or two environments. And when you're a small enterprise that has a security shop that might be like, one or a few people, you're now putting a huge toll on your security team. And this happens frequently just because devs kind of run in different directions, or there's M&A that results in different pieces. So I'm empathetic to it, but I think it ends up folks waste all these cycles just trying to get their arms around it and not actually making it run.
And by the way, I was about to make some kind of snide remark, is that
never.
Merritt sounds like she works for Amazon, but it's actually a very good advice wherever you work. It's almost like, no.
Yeah. Oh, I don't care which cloud
for Amazon. Yeah, but
they're all reasonably good. Like
they're all reasonably good. That's the nicest thing I've heard said about clouds in a while.
They're all reasonably good and definitely better than your on-prem. I mean, like there will always be limitations, or at least for the foreseeable future, there will be limitations to what you can put in the cloud because there are some OT systems and other things that you can't. So, folks are going to be, many folks are going to be multi-environment for the foreseeable future, but for what you can put into the cloud, if you can streamline it to, one or at most two clouds and not just have things all over the place, you'll get better bang for your buck from a pricing perspective, but you'll also your engineers will understand it better. As a security team, you'll know when to, your trouble ticketing system will be much more seamless with what prompts a trouble ticket. Sophisticated security teams still work at this stuff, but at least you've got those muscle groups in place. You're not just hurting proverbial cats all the time.
I think that the other thing you said about lowest common denominator rings really true for me.
Yeah.
I see teams, we want to be multi-cloud. We have to only use infrastructure. We can't use the services. We have to run instances that run Cloud SQL, We can't use Cloud SQL. And that deprives people of so much
security counter correlated security.
It is. Yeah. And it then forces other bad things, instead of using cloud native detection, I'm going to deploy an IDS because I can run the same IDS everywhere. And that's such a good observation that the multi-cloud gotcha is being multi-cloud at all in many cases.
Yeah, essentially. And especially for folks who don't have the resources to do a lot of, sophisticated correlation between them. But I also just think that generally speaking, even if you are a sophisticated shop and you have the resources to do it, over time, it benefits you if you can get into one or at most two clouds so that you just can focus on refining those muscle groups. You'll still get to the point, are your trouble tickets getting increasingly resolved by robots? Is something that folks still work at, even in sophisticated shops. But it's going to be a whole lot easier if you're seeing behavior, if you're able to write those automations for, one or maybe two environments. And even better, as you point out, Tim, if you can be using managed services where your cloud provider is going up those layers of the stack for you. You're not having to do all of the managedness of it, which is just it's more work and it's more undifferentiated work. It's not
undifferentiated work.
It's not the fun, interesting stuff that your enterprise cares about. It's not the pharma part of pharma or the retail part of retail. It's just the, manual stuff that you're trying to get away from.
So this makes sense, and I think I still want to go back to the depressing take of people who lift and shift kind of blindly. So occasionally I do see security leaders who kind of Control-C, Control-V, all the controls they have on premise, kind of copy the controls to the cloud. And while we always tell them, yeah, that's fine as long as you evolve from that, but what's, Merritt's best advice for people who pretty much just insist on copying everything they have in data centers, stacks, technology, decisions, practices to the cloud? What do you tell them?
Wait, can I give my advice first?
No.
Yeah.
She's a guest.
Oh, sorry. You're the guest.
No,
Please go first.
Go.
Okay, now she wants to do it.
My advice would be retire, but I'm curious what yours is.
Yeah, I guess, I was going to say something to the effect of I would ask who's driving that decision, right? And then what do they care about? So if it's your CIO, what is it about that plan that they are attached to? Is it just the idea that they've told the board that they're going to be
therapy? She recommended therapy, which is good.
That's I often recommend that too.
Sometimes I do too, unrelatedly, but or maybe relatedly.
2024.
There you go. Happy New Year, everyone. Yeah, who's driving that decision? And if it is your security shop, you should question yourselves. But often it's a different part of the business that has said, well, we made a promise that we were going to move, and then, the next year, and so we're just going to do it this way because it's faster. In which case, you now know how to push back on that, because you can say, for folks in the business, you can say it's going to make it more expensive, because it will. If you haven't made things more cloud native, you're going to be clunkier. You're going to be, you won't have right-sized things, but you also won't have the flexibility of a lot of the native capabilities to do security as just part of what you're seeing when you're in cloud, or templatization as part of just how you create new, vending new environments rather than having them stamped by your previous.
So I want to pick on that, actually. I think that's a great segue into the next thing I want to talk about, which is how do we help teams, engineering teams, security teams, compliance teams, this kind of triad, work together on landing zones and blueprints and doing it right from the start, rather than trying to have engineers run ahead, screw it up, get cleaned up, have to fix bugs. How do we shift left?
That's
and do
a hard
right?
question, Tim, though.
She's a good guest.
Yeah, she's good. Yeah.
Well, thanks. I'll try to hold the mantle up here. Yeah, I think your question even like belies a first belief, which is true, which is that you should be template testing. Like, take advantage of the ephemerality and the mutability of cloud. Like you should have, forced escalations. You should have forced lifecycle policies. You should have, and that just makes it so that good intentions are not what you're relying on as a team. But for the devs, actually having an overarching governance that is not just like, on the boss's wall, but is actually enforced through your policies, that is reflected in the technical ways that you've implemented your identity permissions and other things, allows you, and of course you can do this in cloud in increasingly kind of managed and seamless ways, but doing those as just like how you do business actually does make your devs happier, because they get to just like vend themselves new environments without having to either go off the rails and risk you killing it because they've made some non-acceptable environment that they're playing in. Yep. Or without having to like even build it themselves. They can just say, like, these are what we think R&D teams will need access to, and the kinds of environments that they might want to play around in, and the ability, like, it's such a luxury for devs to also get R&D in a way that is both cheap and cheap literally, and also cheap energy wise, that they can just have playgrounds. So I think, but doing that, like, to be able to do that from a security perspective, you have to be doing these in automated ways, vending environments for them and vending identities that are associated with those environments. And then you can kill them, right? But of course, like, your web server gets popped in, you kill and spin up a new one, you haven't solved your problem. So like the way that you are vending these environments themselves is related but different from the ways that you'll embrace ephemerality, is just like part of how you do business in cloud as a security team.
You're giving me major Sunil U vibes right now.
Yeah, the ephemerality argument is definitely. I was about to add his episode to the resources. Because of that exact comment. So Tim is trying to mind read me, and I'm trying to mind read him. I guess. So let me. This actually, well, I think she. Not that I had a canned answer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that. I mean, I think she gave a really good answer to this really tough question. Like I mean it. Like, in the sense. Like,
I agree.
Yeah, I mean it's
a
like,
great answer.
Yeah. So let me try something more philosophical, and I think that it's something that I've dealt with this. It's almost like I'm trying to outsource my job to Merritt. That's a bad idea.
That's a bad idea.
Yeah, it's a bad idea. Okay, so like there's one question that worried me.
For the next 9 minutes, you got me. So
okay, so the setup is like this. We do occasionally get people who practice lift and shift, and we tell them, fine, it's a choice, but like don't do it. And we tell them you should practice a more cloud native approach to security. To which some of those security leaders look back at us and say, how? And I realize that I don't have a crisp answer to what is the essence, what is the DNA for a cloud native approach to security. Sure, you can say automation, using APIs, using cloud native services, but it all feels kind of not quite it. So maybe if somebody wakes you up at 3 a.m. and says...
it's a 3 a.m. test, fine. Listeners. We get it.
Merritt, what's the essence of cloud native approach to security? What would you say? Okay, 3 a.m. was not unnecessary. It was unnecessary. Yeah, you're right.
I think it is related to what we've been talking about today with the, infrastructure as code and ephemerality, but I also think it is basically the modularization of building.
Oh.
So, and we see this with, so as you modularize your code libraries and you're checking in and out and you're able to, we also see this with security work tracking along with it. And so for every shift left effort that you have that's doing infrastructure as code and inspecting that code, you also have a shift right that's like stuff is going to happen.
Yeah.
And now you need to be able to do threat detection, but like at the API level or at the, you're getting into the world of abstractions. And so what you're going to be interacting with are sets of other abstractions. And I think that ultimately, some of those happen at different layers. Some of these will be looking at whether this call is authorized. Some of these will be, looking at the traffic at the edge or other things. But some of them will be getting into the content of what you're building, throughout the code. So I think it's that luxury and like the beauty and the horror of abstraction. I think that's at least to me, that's very
interesting
I'm actually getting a Phil Venables vibe in this because Phil likes to highlight the abstraction machine nature of cloud as an argument for cloud being more secure. So that's actually really good. I think that it is not something where my mind would go, like modularization, but I think it's a hugely useful direction. I think that ultimately you can't automate until you modularize and do abstractions. Automation would be Snowflake automation, wouldn't work.
As you mentioned, this is on some level philosophical, but on others literal, which I think brings us back, even I'm going to go back to the godmother of computing, Ada Lovelace, who was one of the first few who said, computers aren't just giant calculators. There can be, reasoning, there can be, and of course she was Lord Byron's daughter, so a poet's daughter. You know what I mean? There are ways in which you can conceptualize and also reimagine what computers can process. And then on the other hand, they're only going to execute on commands that are given to, that humans write. So I think it's this really fine-edged sword of the power that's there, and then also the limitations, or at least the dangers of, once you get into that world, doesn't mean that you don't have to put the work in. The work will look different.
Listeners, I did not expect an episode today to touch on Ada Lovelace, Lord Byron, and modularity and composability as the hallmarks of
She
cloud
did not
security.
say composability.
I added that one.
Oh, okay, fine.
Yeah. I want to ask one more question before we wrap up, because this is a lot happening in my brain right now. How do we help people scale this? Because what you're describing is hard.
But it's automatically scalable because it's done in a cloud native way, dude.
Is that right?
Yeah, the beauty of it is actually, of course it's easier for me to say sitting here than it is, in practice, it takes work to get your mechanisms in place. But once you have them in place, there is an element of scalability that comes with all of this. If you are, doing infrastructure as code and you're vending environments and you're, pruning your permissions, you can be using cloud native tooling. You can be using other tools. Lacework does an infrastructure as code alert and attack path analysis that says this looks over provisioned. The beauty of having these permissions be something that you can reason about is that, and I mean that in the formal reasoning sense, is that you can also prune them down. So this gives you an ability to then, rather than each time an employee comes in, you ask them what they would like access to, and you give them, it's you delegate the ability for them to vend the apps that make sense for their role. You prune those, you change, there are ways that folks take the templatization that kind of comes with that, but also turn it into a security mechanism. Because if you see someone or some team running into guardrails all the time, either you have, made those guardrails too tight, or they're going off the rails. There's a lot of ways in which you're getting information too by giving folks the freedom to, making those paved roads is hard, but it also makes the secure thing to do the easy thing to do.
Didn't we have the well-lighted path and she has paved roads? I actually like hers better. I think the paved road is better than a well-lighted path. You can still trip and fall on a well-lighted path. I don't know. Fine.
I think those are evolutions. You start out with a path and then it's lit. The idea is
that when you're paving the road, it's a bit of work.
Oh yeah.
But then all of a sudden everyone can go faster. And at some point it'll degrade and you need to or you should question whether that's the right road. You'll still do continuous improvements on these, There may be there's always new services coming up, but there also may be other approaches. One of the beauties of cloud is that every time that you get cloud geeks together in a room, they'll be like, so what are you doing for whatever it is? And people have different, and sometimes they'll say, yeah, I'm doing that too. And other times they'll say, really? So for your infrastructure as code protections, you're using and or you're, IoT, you are using these sensors in your factory to be able to take quick pictures and not have human oversight. Like both the use cases in the real world and on the infrastructure side are constantly like, there's no right. Well, there are more right ways to do it, but there's no like,
the right way.
One road to get there. There's, many. So it's also really creative field. And I think it allows one of the beauties of, like I said, ultimately, I don't know how many shops move to cloud for security, even though I wish they would. But one of the beauties of having the secure thing be something they can have confidence in is that now they get to take it to their business and say, look how much more you can do.
Merritt, I hate to do it. I have to ask our closing questions. One,
Okay.
do you have a tip to help people improve their cloud security, which I think we've talked about 20? And two, do you have recommended reading other than maybe Lord Byron?
No personal attachment, although big fan of poetry. Let's see. Tip, I would say, for folks who are at the enterprise level, make sure that you have some way that you can alert on credential compromise. We're seeing this with social engineering. We're seeing it with credentials getting compromised in technical ways, but just like remember that, the front door is usually where they're coming in. You can have all the alarming you want on the windows, and folks do, but it's generally, and those can be really powerful attacks because they resemble normal behavior. And of course, like no one wants to get ransomware. It happens because it's hard to defend, but at the end of the day, like getting your house in order is the best way to do it. And it's one of the easiest or one of the best bang for your buck is credential management. And if on the individual layer, MFA and password managers. I am a big podcast person, and I've been listening to Jack Rhysider's Darknet Diaries lately. So that's a fun one for folks in industry. I'm also big into Serial and some of the like sort of storytelling around common things that we see in the world that make sense but don't make sense. So anyway, yeah, happy to. What about you guys? What are you reading or listening to? Uh-oh.
Can you hear us now?
Okay, yes.
Excellent. Well, Merritt, I think with that, a mind at peace with all below, a heart whose love is innocent, I think we have to wrap things up today. And Anton and I will figure out, listeners, how to get all of the technology problems working a little bit better next time.
All good. Just real
Thanks,
life, live shows.
Thank
You
you.
can find me on Twitter at Merritt Bear. Thanks, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Don't close the tab.
Okay.
Yeah, so keep
should
this tab
say-
open while the stuff uploads, and then we'll